getting things right is really important, even in opinion work. The truth is simply the most important thing. And we live in a democracy where at least the idea is that the people govern themselves. And the people can't govern themselves if they don't have the truth. And if you print abject falsehoods, then you're killing your own country. So, and it doesn't matter if you're writing for, the local newspaper or the Wall Street Journal, or the New York Times. You just can't get stuff wrong. Now, we're all human, we all mess up. But you should go to every conceivable length to make sure that you're not printing something that you know is false.
Join the best in the movement. It's Conservative Conversations with ISI, educating for liberty since 1953.
Welcome back. You're listening to Conservative Conversations with Marlo Slayback and Tom Saruf.
Our guest today is one of our standout society leaders, Rodge Reschini, who's a senior at Cornell University, where he is studying government. He is the president of the Cornell College Republicans and the editor-in-chief of our Collegiate network newspaper at Cornell, the Cornell Review. He's also a recent ISI CN intern with USA Today. So thanks for coming on, Rodge.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Before we begin our interview, we'd like to thank you for listening to Conservative Conversations. This podcast is a production of the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, and our mission is educating for liberty. If you'd like to join us in fulfilling our mission, be sure to rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts to help us reach more listeners like yourself. So, Rodge, there's a lot we can talk about with you, and especially considering your role, as a student journalist. But we'd like to start out by kind of, allowing listeners to envision what the landscape looks like at Cornell. And so if you could tell us a little bit more about what it's like being a Cornell student today, what it's like being a student journalist at Cornell, and just giving us a sense of the general atmosphere.
Yeah, of course. So from 10,000 feet, Cornell is a really unique college. It's a great place. It's beautiful. Here we are in the southern tier of New York, surrounded by mountains, the Finger Lakes. It's beautiful. It also happens to be one of the most insane colleges in the country. The overwhelming majority of students are very liberal, but really most of them are just apathetic. I like saying that my most prominent fight isn't even with the campus left or the administration, it's with students who just don't care. So that's what the political life is like. You don't even see a big Cornell Democrats or Cornell Progressives. Both organizations are very small. People just don't care. That comes from the school being very STEM focused, certainly, with a dying liberal arts curriculum, which I've written about a lot at the Review. But otherwise, Cornell's pretty insulated from things. We're more than an hour from the closest interstate highway. We have our own little bubble here surrounded by reality. So otherwise, again, everyone is just, when you enter Ithaca, you get the sense that everyone is very busy and they have better things to do and think about than what they're doing or thinking about right now. So this attitude kind of infects everything at Cornell, from campus politics to student organizations life. Again, Cornell's a very workaholic school in this way.
And Rodge, as the head of the College Republicans, I was also the head of my College Republicans at Boston College, and there's a similar vibe. I think it was probably, more political than what you're describing at Cornell. But, as a leader, you sometimes think about, well, what can I do to advance my cause or to advance the mission of the organization that I'm heading? So would love to hear from you about, what sort of things that you're doing at Cornell with the College Republicans to bring conservatism to campus, to advance the conservative cause on the campus of Cornell.
Yeah, so the way that I think about this, there's really two schools of thought to running any conservative organization at a college like this, or really any college, where the overwhelming majority of students are, disagree with you, sometimes violently. And that is, one, be conciliatory, bring people that might have some chance of maybe sparking conversation with the other side, trying to reach out an olive branch, or you can bring people who say what we actually think and expose people who might have never heard these perspectives before to a different way of thinking. At some point over the summer, I kind of realized that it was my job, which I take very seriously, to expose Cornell students to viewpoints that, again, they might have never heard before in their lives. The university is not going to show a conservative point of view to these students. They might go their entire 4 years without hearing from a single conservative intellectual, prominent conservative thinker, even presidential candidate, depending on how active people are on social media. Like, it's very possible that a poster they come across from the Cornell Republicans or an article from the Cornell Review is one of Cornell students' only exposures to conservatism. So I very quickly eschewed the conciliatory, let's try to make nice attitude in favor of let's show people what we actually think. Because at the end of the day, there's no less than 120 million Americans that have these perspectives and hold this value system. And if that's just silent on, the 14th best college in the country, then we're setting a future generation of leaders up for failure.
What would you say is a topic that you mentioned most students at Cornell are apathetic? Is there any topic that you think is particularly prone to attracting if there's anything that would, cause them to get up in arms about a certain topic? I know at most colleges, it's probably social issues. That seems to be something that rouses even the most apathetic of campuses, because like you mentioned, the default setting is kind of like, lefty, progressive. And even when they're apathetic, that seems to be the default setting of the political attitude or disposition. Is there anything like that at Cornell? Is there something that, is just off limits? And if anyone pokes the bear, it would otherwise kind of cause campus to, become upset with that?
Oh, definitely. And it's definitely social issues. It always is these days. And again, as you say, even the most, even the engineer who's working on a CS project at 3 a.m. in Upson Hall, which is more common than I like to think, even they will take note when someone dares to cross the sacred cow. For example, last year we had this saga about Plan B vending machines. And this was a virus that infected many schools across the country. Unfortunately, at Cornell, it's come to fruition. So our reporting on the topic at the Cornell Review, we just reported straight news, what the Student Assembly did, which was use student money, or at least try to, and now it's happening, to put Plan B vending machines around campus. The Cornell Reddit did not like our straight news coverage, and they doxed our reporters, they put their names on the website. Overall, not a great time. I was kind of harassed by the president of the University Assembly over our coverage on the whole thing. I say kind of because, I don't know, he came up to me after class and demanded that I remove a certain article. That feels like harassment to me, but I'm not a lawyer. So again, issues like these, when they come up, will get people upset. And even just talking about it, even covering it, not even opinion coverage, just straight news coverage. If it's at all questioning of the core premise, then you might have a not fun time for a few weeks.
Rodge, you were saying earlier about how Cornell is a STEM-focused school, at least from the administration side, that's what their focus is on. And so I wonder what that means for the liberal arts at Cornell and the sort of mindset that permeates, politically said it's largely apathetic, but leans to the left or is of the left because there's just no real right wing, at least official apparatus. But I'm wondering, I guess, if the STEM, because we think of STEM maybe as being a neutral space, it's not really political. The engineering student just doesn't care that much unless, you run afoul on some social issue like you were just saying. But the sort of, I guess, the sort of mindset for what's valuable in society or what's worthwhile or what counts as knowledge, what counts as being of value. I'm wondering if you could speak to that in your experience talking to your classmates at a school that's very focused on STEM as opposed to the liberal arts.
Yeah, so it's also worth mentioning that Cornell does not have a core curriculum. We have no core set of classes that every student is required to take. We have distribution requirements, scare quotes heavily suggested, in which students have to take a class that fulfills like a broad subject area, like historical difference or social difference or global citizenship, which might be my personal favorite for jargon award. But yeah, the liberal arts are kind of dying at Cornell. My favorite way to encapsulate this is one of the oldest buildings on campus is McGraw Hall. It's beautiful. It's the centerpiece of the Arts Quad. It's this stone and brick construction that has been around since 1874, I want to say. Cornell has just let it rot. It's falling apart. They had to like staple these big metal beams to the side of the building to keep it from falling over. They had a partial roof collapse a few years ago. This is where the history and anthropology departments live. Meanwhile, they just tore up the baseball field in the center of campus to build a new CS building at the cost of $65 million, while the primary liberal arts building, or at least one of them, is collapsing in on itself. Now, over the summer, they finally announced that they were going to renovate it, finally, because it was becoming like actually dangerous. But I think that kind of encapsulates Cornell's attitude towards the liberal arts. Politically, engineers are definitely more neutral. Like they don't have the hard indoctrination of a lot of art students, so they're easier to reason with if you can just get them to care to begin with. I've had a lot of success having civil conversations with engineers, even if they aren't conservative. They come away at least more open to hearing an alternative perspective. And a lot of the members of, say, the political union on campus, which is our debate society, are engineers. And I think that's notable to mention.
So, Rodge, what would you say is, among the conservatives at Cornell, what is the like vibe that they have? Is there a like a political, like a conservative school of thought that you think you can lump most of them under? I know I've spoken to so many different students that so it's really a wide spectrum of the flavor of each campus society and each, campus conservative presence. Like I know at one school, they told me that a lot of their students at the college Republicans there, weirdly enough, I was really surprised for, this is an Ivy Plus school. And they told me that they really like Marjorie Taylor Greene, which was like, I'm not sure if a few years ago when I was in college, that would have been the case for my campus college Republicans. And then, from other schools, I'll hear I know like the Pitt College Republicans, for example, they're really big into doing activism for like Ron DeSantis or whatever. So some societies are much more activist while doing the kind of the more humanities-centric education that ISI focuses on. That's separate from that sort of thing. And even, when we do find those societies that aren't interested at all in like doing political activism separately from the ISI education, since we are a 501c3 and we don't, endorse candidates or anything, they're mostly interested in, reading like C.S. Lewis and doing some of the more, the conservative canon, reading groups, things like that. So we get that's just to explain kind of the range for any listener that's listening to this today. What would you say is the kind of your sense of what the appeal is on your campus among the conservatives?
Yeah, so we have 15,000 undergraduates. Like Cornell's an enormous school. So we really run the gamut. I mean, not so much anymore, but you used to have the diehard Trump people who went off and they formed their own group because Cornell's just so big. And they decided that Cornell Republicans wasn't radical enough for them, so they did their own thing. You have the intellectuals who are very interested in having reading groups and debates and stuff. That's another ISI society on campus. Then you also have, Cornell Republicans, which is more, I wouldn't even say activism focused, just like, we're here, this is our campus, and we have a right to say what we want to. And you have no ability to stop us from doing that. Then you have the Cornell Review, which is more focused on kind of a level-headed approach to what's going on, let's talk about it. But intellectually speaking, it's very strange. Integralism is very strong at Cornell. There's a very vibrant subculture of almost every conservative organization up here that has, a strong Catholic and integralist contingent underneath it, or at least leaning in this way, if not outright and explicitly so. Otherwise, again, you have a lot of people that are still very pro-Trump, very MAGA, if you will. Those people aren't super prominent in conservative leadership, but they're definitely still a force on campus in dialogue. And then you have a lot of people that, kind of want to return to the Reaganite era of things as well. And you find that in the more business communities, which, since Cornell has both an undergraduate and graduate school of business, which are enormous, that's a very large group of people. So I'm sorry, not really answering your question because it's all over the place. And we have so many people that there's space for everyone. I just wish they would all come to events.
Let's turn then, I think, to the Cornell Review, because that's in addition to the College Republicans, that's also a great place where you're doing a lot of work. And so the Cornell Review is one of ISI's Collegiate Network newspapers. Our listeners will be familiar with some of our Collegiate Network work that we do at ISI. We've had a number of student journalists on. But recently, one of your pieces, Rodge, was picked up by the New York Times and the New York Post, probably some other places as well, but two very prominent newspapers. I think that the Post is the oldest newspaper in the country. But it was in regards to the campus trigger warning requirement that I think it passed the student assembly, but then ultimately wasn't passed. But it caused like a whole, brouhaha. So tell us more about that, what the review did to shed light on it, and what it's like getting picked up by the Times.
Oh, this was quite the saga last semester. And it's worth noting that all of this broke out it was a day before spring break, so Easter, that the student assembly decided that it wanted to go insane. And unanimously, which I guess a little bit of background first, the Cornell University Student Assembly is a sordid institution with a long history of corruption, and I mean that in the most strict sense of the term, i.e. they took $5,000 of student money and used it to throw themselves a gala. They took $10,000 of student money and gave it to Black Lives Matter. This is an institution with a long history of misdeeds, shall we say. They also are completely illegitimate because only 12% of the student body actually votes in their elections, which would constitute an authoritarian dictatorship in most comparative politics classes. Anyways, they decided that it would be a very good idea to universally mandate trigger warnings across the entire campus in every single syllabus because one person was very upset that their professor talked about the rape of Nanking, which was a historical event, horrible, tragic, and we should absolutely talk about it because it was not that long ago, and it contains some very, horrible truths about human nature that need to be discussed. Well, someone didn't want to talk about that, and so they petitioned the Student Assembly to draft a resolution that would require that any syllabus, any document that contained anything that could potentially be upsetting contain a trigger warning, and not only that, but the option for a student to simply not do the assigned reading or watch the assigned film or do an assignment, i.e. a get out of work free if I am offended policy. This passed the Student Assembly unanimously, I think the Tuesday or the Thursday before we all left for Easter break. We picked it up almost immediately because we kind of have we have eyes and ears in the places and rooms where these decisions happen. We were shocked because we didn't think it would go anywhere, much less be passed unanimously, rammed through, kind of not in the middle of the night, but it was essentially like a Friday, late Friday news dump. Anyways, FIRE, also the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, also picked it up, and to their credit, they immediately sent a letter to the administration demanding that the thing be shut down. The Cornell administration usually takes a few weeks to respond to actions by the Student Assembly. They like taking their time, having their media people figure out the best way to say, yeah, good idea, but we're not going to do that in as nice a way as possible. This time it took them 4 days, and they slapped it down in just about the coldest way imaginable. Martha Pollack, the university's president, essentially said that it was a horrible idea and we would not be doing this. Again, 4 days. And the Student Assembly was humiliated because by this point, the Post had already picked up the story, we had been writing about it, and soon enough, the New York Times came along and picked up our editorial. Our editorial got something tens of thousands of views, I want to say, or at least 10,000. It was a massive story. Again, we didn't really think it was going to go anywhere, so we weren't ready for the media blitz over Easter break of all things. And yet. So we all got back to campus, and the day I get back, I get an email from a New York Times reporter saying, hey, we want to do a story on this. So our then editor-in-chief talked to the Times, and they wrote something of a blistering story covering all of it. The long and short, the end result is that this catastrophe was so bad, and it received so many disparaging headlines in no less than the Times, the Post, I think the Journal as well, that the university was scared into having a year focused on free expression, which we are now in. President Pollack doesn't like Cornell being dragged through the mud in headlines, so, doing that seems to be a pretty effective way of getting them to listen to student concerns.
So has it been a year of free expression so far, or do you think it's all just, kind of a way to, manicure what was a somewhat chaotic and not, flattering few news days?
I really don't know. I'd like to assume the best, especially because, I work with the Cornell administration, given my dual positions as the president of CRs and editor-in-chief of the Cornell Review. I work with the Cornell administration pretty frequently, and all the people that I work with there are fantastic people. I spoke with the VP of the university a few days ago for help getting rooms reserved for events, and, they've been very good to work with. So it remains to be seen, because there's not really been an event to test the university's resolve when it comes to the whole year of free expression. I have some private doubts that when push comes to shove, they'll stand by to the line that they said, but I'm cautiously optimistic, if for no other reason than I would like my events to go forward without disruption. Like, really, the other aggravating factor for the year of free expression was there was an organization that was not Cornell Republicans that brought Ann Coulter, who's a Cornell alumna, to speak last year, the day after the midterm elections. She got through about 2 seconds of her speech before disruptions started. And it was a rather ingenious, I hate to give credit to the campus left, but it was a rather ingenious tactic where, someone would start shouting or playing something from their phone. She walked down the stairs of the auditorium and they were playing clown music, circus music. That was dealt with. Then someone else would start, et cetera, et cetera. Cornell decided that it would be very good to send an administrator to talk to all these disruptors before just removing them. So after no less than 7 separate disruptions, 22 minutes in total, Miss Coulter called the event, ended it early, and it just simply did not happen. So she was prevented from sharing her remarks, which would have been, funnily enough, if they had let her finish talking, probably pretty agreeable to them. Because it was basically like, Trump is bad, and he just cost the Republican Party a whole bunch of seats in the midterms. So I have my doubts that Cornell will prevent something like that from happening again, but I'm really hopeful that they will. Again, if for no other reason than I would like my events to go forward and not have them be canceled.
Well, that's a good thing to want. I can speak to experience of not having my events go forward at College Republicans because the BC administration dragged their feet. So the fact that they're publicly putting their name and their stake out saying we're going to do this year of free expression, year of free speech, even if I guess it's not clear on the campus what that means, that's still a pretty big deal. So kudos to you and kudos to the work that you did at the review to do your part in bringing that about. But actually, I want to ask you on the substantive matter of the issue. The issue is about how academic freedom and trigger warnings don't mesh well together. The trigger warning is necessarily an affront to academic freedom, which is something that professors for the longest time have been using as a way to cover over or give themselves wiggle room to push the boundaries of certain ideas, push the boundaries of certain things in the classroom with their students. And now you can basically do anything if you're a professor under the guise of academic freedom. But I'm wondering what you as a student think about the concept of academic freedom, both as someone running a conservative organization and sort of wanting to maybe use that as a way to give yourself wiggle room strategically. That's something I tried to think about when posturing with the administration over speakers and events, but also how it affects your college education and the liberal arts that make us human fundamentally, but also make college worthwhile in terms of learning things that one needs to learn, or learning things that one needs to know in order to live a humane life.
Yeah, of course, and it's a really important question, especially here at Cornell, given the theme of the year. I think, as with free speech, we tend to use academic freedom as this kind of rug that we can just sweep anything underneath. And I think that we need to be careful, is the long and short of my answer. I.e. with free speech, I wrote a column a little while ago, kind of a welcome back column, essentially saying, without some restrictions on free speech, you just don't have a society. If it's okay for me to run into the center of the art squad and shout obscenities, then that shouldn't be considered free speech. In the same way that teaching abject falsehoods and racial hatred and stuff like this should not be considered academic freedom. It's a misuse of the term to justify bad behavior. Now, on the contrary, academic freedom is incredibly important because, especially as a conservative on a liberal campus, you need some kind of assurance that the university isn't going to just take away your ability to speak. So after the whole trigger warning debacle, I wrote a column that got some attention called "Trigger Warnings Are Bad, Voluntary or Not." And I essentially argued that, yeah, like, you need to be exposed to things that you disagree with. That's the entire point, as you said, of a liberal education. You need to, if you come up in an echo chamber, especially if you're, say, a government major who's going to be running things someday, you need to be exposed to how other people think. Because it's never good to just be surrounded by your own ideas, your own values, especially when we live in a pluralistic country where at least 50% of the country disagrees with you, and nowadays, vehemently. So academic freedom is incredibly important, don't get me wrong. I just think we need to be really careful when we use the phrase and not use it as an excuse to justify things that really should not be taught, i.e. 1619 project, historical revisionism that only exists to make people hate each other.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, the aspect of, especially because I went to a public school, so it was definitely not an environment where you had, you kind of had a majority of people who more or less agreed on, they adopted progressive values, were very, they were not sympathetic at all to conservative, especially on social issues, like you mentioned. I think that's if you want to ignite any sort of backlash on campus, it's when the college Republicans or whatever conservative group brought, conservative speakers on social issues. And ISI has done a few of those in the last several months that I think exemplified that ideological passion, I guess, that the progressives have. But we also want to make sure that education, if you don't stand for something, then this education just ends up being this very nebulous blob of nothingness. And when you're a 21, 22-year-old, 18-year-old for that matter, entering college, while your professor perhaps shouldn't be trying to mold you into a mirror image of their own political opinions and other lifestyle opinions and choices, having that formation in virtue and truth, and cultivating that instinct to grow towards that, instead of this kind of blob of, like I said, nothingness, of relativism. It seems like that's where the university is failing the most right now. So it isn't free speech for just free speech's sake. You're trying to put students on the path to righteousness, to truth, to at a parochial school, growing closer to God. So I think that's a valuable point. I'm glad that you were making at Cornell. And to speak a little bit more about, on a personal note, since you were one of our CN interns at the Collegiate Network, we'd love to hear more about your experience with being a student journalist and working at a publication during the summer, and kind of what skills and experiences you got from that you feel well set you up for coming back to campus and doing another year of hard-hitting student journalism at Cornell.
Oh yeah, and I just want to express my sincere gratitude to CN for making the internship happen. I mean, it was a fantastic experience. I guess I should describe it. So I interned at USA Today over the summer for their opinion department, and I had the immense privilege of working with the team over there. Some really great people. I got to know them quite well, even if only over Microsoft Teams, because I was remote. But still, it was a fantastic experience. I learned a lot, and I got to meet and work with some really great people. And I had the immense privilege of being published in their opinion pages 4 times. So, it's always great to have some writing out there, just so, it's just a great thing to say, like at a dinner party, like, oh, hi, I wrote for USA Today. But beyond that, you really learn some great skills. You learn specifically when you work for a big publication like that, how to do a deep dive on just about anything, and how to not take anything, even like the smallest line buried in, paragraph 14 of some massive opinion piece, for granted. You never assume that the author is right about anything. that kind of skepticism is perhaps cynical, but it's really important for a journalist because, as a journalist, especially now when you've got social media running around, getting things right is really important, even in opinion work. The truth is simply the most important thing. And we live in a democracy where at least the idea is that the people govern themselves. And the people can't govern themselves if they don't have the truth. And if you print abject falsehoods, then you're killing your own country. So, and it doesn't matter if you're writing for, the local newspaper or the Wall Street Journal, or the New York Times. You just can't get stuff wrong. Now, we're all human, we all mess up. But you should go to every conceivable length to make sure that you're not printing something that you know is false. And but the foundation of my job at USA Today was fact-checking. I wrote occasionally and did other stuff occasionally, but, my bread and butter was going through every article with a fine-tooth comb and making sure that everything that they said was true. So it might seem like busy work or what have you, but again, I think you can't underestimate the value of something like that for a free society. People need to know what's going on. They need to have the truth. And they need to be confident that, what you're saying is correct, or at least truthful, honest and made in a good faith effort. So much of our current struggles as a nation have come from a collapse of that trust, have come from the media capitulating on delivering fair and honest news coverage in favor of writing what they know is going to get internet clicks. That's, a trend of the industry. It's very unfortunate. But again, it cannot be overstated the importance of getting things right and being honest.
Very true. Very well said, Rodge. And I think it's encouraging that someone, I'd say of your age, but that's also probably my age. So people of our age have the conscientiousness about what's required for a successful, high-level, high-talented, high-quality journalism, but also how that relates to the nature of our political regime. And, it's quite upsetting to see journalists who, the founders understood a robust journalistic news practice and a whole apparatus as being important for a free, self-governing republic, holding people accountable, making sure that people knew about the virtues and vices and qualities and the work that their representatives were doing. And so instead of, quote unquote, holding truth to power, as the saying goes, they're actively running cover for whatever regime, really propaganda that they want to push today, whether that's from, mask mandates and COVID hysteria or, gender affirming care, whatever so-called, whatever that might be. So, yeah, I think I'm glad that we have people like you, and I'm glad that ISI is helping train and form people like you and many of our student journalists across the CN to really think about what's really necessary for good journalism and for true journalism, ordered to the proper things like the truth, which is really the most important thing, as you said. We're coming to the end of our time. I want to ask you a strategic thing that you guys did with, I think, the Cornell Review is you have an alumni newsletter. And I think this is really clever, really brilliant, as in terms of leveraging what matters to the Cornell administration and alumni support, and specifically alumni donor dollars, to help achieve your ends. So what was the thinking behind creating it? How did you sort of set it up? And what would you suggest to other campuses across the country for gaining and using this leverage?
I want to be really charitable to the Cornell administration. And again, I work with them, they're great people, and I'm very thankful for, but really there's two ways to deal with the Cornell administration. You can either do what happened in April, which I don't want to take credit for any of this, by the way. We didn't call up the New York Times and tell them this is a thing happening, you should look into it. But essentially, Cornell responds to two forces. Horrible press cycles, where the New York Times is savaging them for, at least softly savaging them for trigger warnings, or alumni refusing to donate, donating with stipulations, getting scared off from donating, etc. So we discovered relatively early on that one of the most effective ways of, getting the word out was an alumni newsletter. And why is that important? Well, again, the alumni are still a very interested part of the picture here. It's not like they just go away from Cornell and they're no longer a factor. Alumni dollars, especially at Cornell, are an enormous part of the puzzle. President Pollock just announced a new capital campaign that raised $500 million in 1 year, or 1.5 years. It was a crazy amount of money. So Cornell has very supportive alumni networks. But the point is that the alumni deserve to know what's going on. If they're giving their money to a school like this, then they need to know what's happening at that school. They have every right to, before they donate, have a very good idea of what kind of institution they're supporting. So we decided that we would fill that gap. A large part of our audience isn't even active students. Now, a lot of active students read our articles, but I'm not sure if it's an equally large share, but certainly a large number are alumni. You can see when you pull up the chart of where are our viewers coming from. You've got people in Singapore and China and India. It's like, what on earth are these people doing reading the Cornell Review? Well, they're alumni who want to know what's going on before sending money to Cornell. So we used we tried a few different services, and we essentially selected the big articles that really cut to the center of campus discourse, and we put those in a newsletter and we sent them out. We received some good feedback on it as well, so it's definitely a project that I'd like to continue in the coming year.
That's great, Rodge. Well, I also wanted to just give another shout out to the Collegiate Network. Rodge, you did a internship, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So Collegiate Network also offers fellowship opportunities. So if you're a student journalist who's listening, I believe those applications are either open or will be open soon for the next round. So this is internships and paid fellowships. Both are paid. Fellowships are a year long after you graduate college or once you're a recent graduate. And I did both the internship and the fellowship as an aspiring journalist in college, and then right after I graduated. And there's a really nice and growing selection of different publications that you can have a placement at. So I really encourage anyone who's listening to this who wants a similar experience to Rodge, learning the ropes of doing reporting or editing, go to isi.org to learn more about those fellowship opportunities and internship opportunities. Well, Rodge, thanks again so much for joining us. It's always great to hear from our students and talk about the state of the campus. And we said this at the conference earlier a few weeks ago, but you are our eyes and ears on campus. So we really appreciate you giving us some insights into what's happening and how student journalists can legitimately make a difference for representing conservatives, not only on campus, but beyond. So really grateful for the work you're doing. And if people want to follow you or more of your budding career, where can they find you, whether that's social media or perhaps in the pages at your Collegiate Network paper?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you guys again so much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you. Obviously follow the Cornell Review, which is thecornellreview.org. I am on Twitter, or I guess we're calling it X now, at R_Reschini, Reschini. And let's see, I think that's it. So yeah, I really encourage you to read the Cornell Review, even if you're not a Cornell student, because we do we cover a lot of stories that have broader significance. So hope you check those out.
Great. Well, thanks again so much, Rodge. And thank you for listening to Conservative Conversations with ISI. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to head over to our website, isi.org/resources, to see all that we offer our members, including the Intercollegiate Review, select modern age articles, and of course, this podcast. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to rate and review, and we'll see you next time on Conservative Conversations with ISI.